Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tasman Crowe, and I'm the director of the UCD Earth Institute, which is UCD's Institute for Environmental and Sustainability Research. You're all very welcome to UCD in Conversation. This series reflects UCD's Rising to the Future strategy and its 4 pillars, which are creating a sustainable global society, transforming through digital technology, building a healthy world, and empowering humanity. Today's episode is titled Building a Sustainable Future with Business. Business has a key role in sustainability. For real change to occur, it's essential that businesses consider their impact on society and the environment. Increasingly, organizations are obliged to incorporate sustainability into their business strategies and are seeking to do so and to be seen to do so. As companies come under increased pressure to meet their environmental, social, and governance goals, how can we know they're truly complying? This episode, in collaboration with UCD Alumni Relations, picks up from the 2019-2020 UCD SDG seminar series, which the Earth Institute hosted to explore the research behind the UN SDGs and featured some of the most informed academic staff members and alumni and practitioners. You should be able to find the link for these in the chat box. Today's webinar will be roughly an hour long and will include a Q&A at the end. So please submit your questions throughout the conversation using the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. So now I'm going to hand over to Professor Donna Marshall, who will introduce us to our expert panelists and lead a conversation with them on building a sustainable future with business. Professor Marshall is the first female full professor of supply chain management to be appointed in Ireland. She's also founder of the UCD Centre for Business and Society. She's president of IPSERA, the International Purchasing and Supply Education and Research Association, and is also one of the leaders of the People, Work and Society theme in the UCD Earth Institute. Her current research focuses on supply chain information disclosure and transparency, new supply chain forms for tackling global issues, as well as innovations in bioeconomy networks. As well as being very active and influential in her research field, she's also won awards for teaching, and she advises government, NGOs and companies on responsible sourcing, supply chain sustainability, and supply chain transparency. So thanks very much indeed for taking the time to join us today, Donna, and I'm very happy to hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Taz. That's a lot to live up to. So I'd like to say hi to everyone and a huge warm welcome to our UCD alumni and UCD Earth Institute in Conversation series. As Taz said, I'm Donna Marshall, and I'll be hosting this week's conversation where we'll be discussing building a sustainable future with business. To join me in this conversation, we have 2 very special guests, both UCD alums having a real impact on how we see sustainability in business. So our first guest today is Ali Sheridan. Ali studied with us for her MSc in Sustainable Business at UCD before going on to be a sustainability practitioner across multiple organizations and countries. Ali is also world famous as the top 10 voice in LinkedIn for 2020, and let's hope 2021. She's now doing a PhD at Maynooth University investigating sustainability leadership and the gap, and there is a huge gap, between intent and implementation. And she actually welcomes anyone who's watching to get involved and to contact her afterwards. Ali, you are so welcome to the In Conversation series. Our second guest today is Laura Costello. Laura did her bachelor's with us in English and philosophy before going on to get her master's in literature at Trinity. She's also got a business sustainability management certificate from Cambridge Institute of Sustainability Leadership. Laura is now the strategy director for Think House, Purpose and Planet, but she's having a huge impact, particularly in the advertising and marketing industry through Purpose Disruptors. So this is a community of creative professionals where she recently launched her report at COP26, which is set to reshape advertising and marketing to tackle climate change. So Laura, we are absolutely delighted to have you with us. It's great to have you here. So as we know, our planet is hotter now than it's ever been in the last 12,000 years. We have the highest CO2 levels for 4 million years. And in 1 year alone, fossil fuels have killed 10 million people. That's 1 in 5 deaths worldwide, more than double the number of deaths from COVID-19. COVID-19 has also uncovered the vulnerabilities and inequalities in our work and economic systems. It's derailed the Sustainable Development Goals, our strategy for the planet, with at least 2/3 of them now way off track. At least 1 in 3 people in the world went hungry, a 500% increase from the year before. That was last year. So that means a quarter of children under 5 on the planet will be stunted. Workers over this period have lost $4 trillion in wages. That's 4 times more than the financial crash of 2008, with women and young people bearing the brunt. But some companies are thriving. Alphabet, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, and Microsoft made combined profits of over $1 billion every day for the first months of 2021. So these statistics and figures that many of us are well versed in are staggering, and they seem almost insurmountable. So this could lead to a lot of paralysis, and it has led to a lot of paralysis for people trying to get their head around sustainability in their personal lives and in business. But it's really interesting that Ali and Laura are both at the forefront of really pushing sustainability in business. And for me, it's interesting to see where that's come from. Where did the young Ali and the young Laura get that passion? And why are you doing what you're doing today? So I'm going to hand over to Ali first to get some insights.
Yeah, thanks, Donna, and thanks everyone for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be with you all. So yeah, I often reflect on what was the tipping point for me. Where did I become this way inclined? And I don't think there was any one event. I think my journey has allowed a few of those moments to I suppose, make me face the realities of some of the tensions we're facing around our futures, and then maybe pivoting my career as I've moved through the years towards having as much of an impact as possible. I do remember growing up, I grew up in Leixlip in County Kildare, and at the time it was still classed as a large village moving into a town status, but very much surrounded by green space. I would get to school cutting through shortcuts through the fields, still a lot of agriculture and farming around. And then we had the arrival of 2 big American companies, HP and Intel, in quite a short amount of time, and everything around me changed. On the great side, everyone I knew was getting a job in their parents. My first job was actually in the coffee shop in one of those companies as well. But then on the other side, asking very real questions about that balance between our natural world and business and the good sides and the benefits of that. So that led me to go and study environmental management and planning in DIT at the time, where I suppose, you know, there was a bit more focus maybe on the planning than the environmental management side, but it certainly piqued my interest around why was I learning all this and then leaving the university and hearing nothing about the concern that I was feeling from what I was learning. So I did my thesis on environmental education, which I suppose landed me my first real job, which was in Antashka in Green Schools, a fantastic program of schools up and down the country, looking at environmental issues and environmental education. And I certainly think that that role was really instrumental in giving me a very strong moral compass and value system around this issue. There's nothing more humbling than talking to kids and young people about climate change when they don't have those biases and those vested interests and those silos that we bring with us and that we develop as adults. You know, this is their futures we're talking about, and it's very black and white. We either act or we don't. But at the end of the day, I felt the kids got it. They knew what the problem was, and I started to look at where maybe the problem was coming from. And I turned towards business and got really interested to understand what was the role of industry in both contributing to climate change, but potentially helping us in terms of figuring a way out. And I jumped into a management consultancy, which was certainly a baptism of fire in terms of that values and metrics and the kind of language even being used than what I'd been used to. But again, it was really eye-opening in terms of, you know, forcing me to understand how to better communicate these issues in ways people understood in their worlds. And I ended up just working on a few food strategies by chance, which really opened my eyes to the potential of the food industry in Ireland to make a big difference here, but also massive challenges ahead in terms of current practices and what needed to happen. So I got very lucky that I got accepted by Borbia to take part, like you say, in the Masters in UCD with Smurfit. An amazing 2-year experience, packed a lot of huge experience in that, both, you know, the learnings from UCD, getting to go abroad and working with some of the biggest global food companies around the world, understanding what they were doing, and then coming back and getting to share it here. And I spent a number of years in the food industry. Then moved on to IKEA, which is an example of a company which is really having to completely transform now around what its future is. No more fast furniture, looking at renting, repairing, renewable energy. And then, like you say, the last few years have been a busy mix of consulting, lecturing, lots of universities moving into the space, so helping to design modules, and the PhD with Minute as well. And I think my career is very indicative of the journey corporate sustainability has gone, you know, very much starting on the resource efficiency, the energy, the water, the waste, moving into the kind of fluffy CSR, the attempts at the triple bottom line, but knowing now the shortcomings with that idea that we equally balance economic and environment, that's not the maths, and now into this world of net zero, science-based targets, and regenerative leadership, which I'm sure we'll get into in a while.
That's great, Ali. Thank you so much. I can just see the young Ali in the coffee shop there, getting up the passion for sustainability. Fantastic. Thanks so much, Ali. Let's ask the same question to Laura. So how did you get into advertising and marketing, and what was the young Laura thinking about that really led you into the whole sustainability field?
Thanks, Donna. And Ali, I love hearing all these stories. This is so lovely. Hi, everyone. I wish I could see you all in a room as well, but here we go. Yeah, so as was said in the intro, I actually studied in UCD, and I did philosophy and English, and I went on to do a master's. And after that, I dyed my hair blue and decided that I was going to focus on having fun. And that's really how I found Pink House, because I did a thesis in popular culture all around kind of music and literature. And so Pink House was a place that had been born out of youth culture. It was born to connect with younger audience in a creative way, the way that other maybe more traditional PR consultancies did at the time when it was born. Was it 21 years ago now? So I've been in Pink House now for 7 years, and I was really lucky when I first started that they had and they still do have an amazing roster of clients. And one of the first brands I was put on was Ben & Jerry's. And if you don't know Ben & Jerry's, they're a B Corp. They're a brand that really champions climate justice and social justice. So I actually started learning a lot about climate through the brand that I was working on with Ben & Jerry's and the team, who were doing incredible work all over the world. They're a very activist brand as well, like the founders have been arrested at protests and things like this. And I learned very quickly that they were a bit of an outlier in that brand space, that not many brands were coming to us with briefs about climate change and climate protests and ice cream. But it was a lot of fun, and I really engaged with it, and that got me a bit more curious. But unlike Ali, it wasn't necessarily something that happened over time. I actually remember the time and day where I had this shift from climate being one thing that happened and something I was interested in to it being the thing. And I actually went on a course in the UK for marketing professionals who wanted to engage with climate through their work. And we spent a weekend together, that like all new strangers. And I think the key thing was giving this topic time. So we had a weekend talking about climate science and hearing from scientists and really going deep in terms of what this meant for our jobs and for the role that we were playing and how we were spending our time. And for me, as a strategist, and a lot of what we do is, you know, you try to grow your client's business. Like that is how success is measured. If you grow the business by creating more sales, then that's tick the box, job done. And when you really spend time reflecting on that, you know, your job isn't necessarily maybe the best thing for the planet. So, you know, as a philosopher, very existential moments happening there. And what actually happened was going back to Pink House and with the amazing team there and amazing leadership team there, actually going through that journey together and talking about it and talking about our role and the guilt that we felt, but also the inspiration that moment actually gave to us to actually use our incredible skills. Like our advertisers and marketers, we're architects of desire. So to use those skills for good and actually say, well, how can we actually do something really exciting with this? And that led to, as you say, Donna, thanks for mentioning purpose disruptors in the introduction, a huge industry-wide conversation that really, really dialed up during COVID, where they were saying, who else is out there who wants to join us in this conversation, and really pushing forward innovative ideas, how we can change the briefs that are coming to us, like through just this expression of wanting to change together. And it was really exciting as well to bring our clients through this journey. It's something that we've opened our doors and shared a lot of our leadership, our thought leadership and our learnings, on an ongoing basis. And what that's actually led to is, thinking back to 7 years ago when I was starting on Ben & Jerry's and a few brands were coming to us with exciting briefs, to now actually in 2020, 39% of our company's briefs and fee was to do with social or environmental campaigns. So that for me is super exciting to actually see this shift happening through our clients as well as ourselves and the industry more broadly. But yeah, I'll always remember that day for when it became the thing, and it really focuses on, how much an impact you can have if you think about, people changing and changing just your own approach to what you do every day, and how that can have a ripple effect.
Thanks so much, Laura. I'd love to bring you to every company I go to and just say, look, we're architects of desire, and we can help you get your sales by thinking about the environment, to get you thinking about people. And I think, the idea of fun, bringing fun back into things, I think that's one thing that we miss, especially when we're in the sustainability field in business, and it just seems like there's so many problems, which there are, but actually thinking of things and reframing and bringing fun back in, I think is a huge part of that. And you also mentioned consciousness, and I think consciousness is the absolute key, and actually people having the time to just sit back and reflect, think about, what am I doing? And I always have this thing about, maybe we should start Marie Kondoing our thinking, and instead of saying, does this bring me joy, is this going to help me thrive? Is this going to help other people thrive? Will this help the planet thrive? So I think we'll change Marie Kondo slightly. We'll have Donna Kondo, and it's going to be, does this help us thrive? And I think that's really, really important. And I think one of the things, that I've come across, and when I was chatting to both of you before, was really about companies finding it really, really difficult to know what sustainability looks like, to understand what maybe true sustainability is. And so, that's a question I'd like to put to you both. What does true sustainability look like for companies? How can they achieve that? And have you come across any good examples that we can emulate or customize or scale up? And I'll start with Laura on this one.
I actually was thinking about this as I was reading a book yesterday called Conversations on Love. You find inspiration in the weirdest places sometimes. And the author was talking about the word sustain, and talking about how you sustain love. And I always think about, sustainability. It's being able to sustain, being able to continue. And we forget about that sometimes. I think there's a total language problem when it comes to sustainability, with people not actually really knowing what we're talking about anymore. But in this book about love, she talks about to sustain, it means strengthen, it means support, but it actually also means, in another definition, to suffer. And that's something that I think gets lost when, yes, we need to be optimistic, we need to remember the joy all of the time, especially in this work, but that change needs to happen, and things need to be lost, sometimes. And that's suffering, I think, to think of it as well, sustainability, there's not necessarily a total end point. We keep going, we change. So I think just thinking of that idea of sustainability at the moment means to change. It means to let go of things, to find new things. I think is a really key image that I have in my mind that I'm holding at the moment. And it looks an awful lot like people. It means connecting with other people, because nobody can be truly sustainable on their own. Another thing that really struck with me recently that I read was about burnt out people, and burnt out people not being able to save the planet. So really focusing on this human approach, I think is so important. And obviously there are loads of examples around true sustainability, and Ali will probably be able to speak a lot more than I can in terms of that. But I think, you know, just to think about how we are nourishing ourselves and how we are nourishing beyond our own businesses and within our businesses is so important. I think, you know, another big buzzword that's becoming, you know, more and more important of late is regenerative practices. That it's not just about hitting some net zero goal or getting caught up in all of these terms, but actually figuring out, like, how are we restoring each other? How are we restoring the planet? Because we need to think very differently about how we're approaching the way that we share everything. And I think that you can get caught up with targets and you need to do all of these scientific things, but this human approach of actually revisiting how we're living our lives in every way sometimes gets lost in the conversation, because you're thinking beyond the way that we've been taught to think. You know, this is something that's totally different. We haven't addressed any challenges like this ever before. And I think that's really important. But yeah, the main thing that I'm holding at the moment is this suffering alongside strengthening.
Fantastic, Laura. I think those are really important ideas. And, you know, there was a lot in what you said around language and the way we think about sustainability and the way we react to sustainability, and actually holding very dichotomous views in your head at once that, you know, these are huge problems and we have to overcome them, and we have to see nourishment, and we have to see joy, and we have to see fun. And I think those are, you can really tell that you have a philosophy background as well. Is fantastic. But I think, you know, taking away the idea that people need to understand the language they're using. And I think language has got us into trouble, you know, again and again, the way we've tried to rationalize everything. We've tried to take everything down to a business case when we need to be taking it to a much more human level and actually remembering who we are and where we're from. So I'm gonna throw that question over to Ali now. You know, Ali, have you seen, you know, examples of really good sustainability? And for you, what does, you know, this idea of true sustainability look like?
Yeah, it's really interesting, because Laura's take on it is a take I have had to unlearn all my business teaching and strategy and all the things I thought I should be doing with business to in any way be effective at helping organizations address this. And it speaks to so much more of what we need to do about that interdisciplinary approach on this. You know, this isn't a supply chain issue. This isn't just about emissions. This is about absolute transformation, business, people, and society. And too long we keep asking, you know, is sustainability good for business? Are looking at how we're going to make it fit into that box of business, and it's the complete wrong approach. And I'll come back to my example of a triple bottom line, which was rolled out as the end goal, right? That sweet spot, if you haven't seen it a million times, that triple Venn diagram of people, planet, and profit. And we were aiming for that sweet spot in the middle. But we know that is not what the science says. We know that we are in a climate, a biodiversity, and a pollution crisis, and we are running out of road in terms of business as usual. And this now new thinking about understanding business within planetary limits, and you spoke to it yourself around the consciousness, I don't think as industries we fully stopped and heard what the science has said on this, because every single industry has been completely built and tried on the assumption that our climate remains stable. And again, that assumption is running out. So starting now to protect, like Laura said, you know, preparing slightly to fail, because there are a lot of industries that cannot exist in a 1.5 degree world. So it's about starting that transformation, starting to understand what we're going to let go of, and understanding what that next iteration is, which isn't just a greener version of whatever it is you're producing today. It's completely different. It's designed differently. It's set up to work within those planetary limits, but also around that social transformation that we're going to as well. So, you know, we're seeing the new language around net zero. And again, it's all about the emissions and the targets and the disclosure. But I have a real fear we're going to get caught in another decade of just getting the numbers. And when we have the numbers, then we'll work. We've been doing that for 3 decades. You know, yes, the numbers get better, but we don't have the luxury of waiting till it's perfect. We've got to start acting. So, you know, targets and plans and projects are important when we start getting them down to the nitty gritty, but we have got to get clarity on where it is that we're going. So for some industries, the future is easier to imagine. For energy, we can see a shift from fossil fuel to renewables. We can see the pace of change that's happening, the EVs, but we've got to have a bigger conversation about the role of consumption If people aren't consuming so much, what is your purpose as a business? What about your employees and your supply chain? And again, the people that have been built around your organization and what they're going to do in the next decade. And they're the kind of questions we've got to start giving space to and working back from if we're going to talk about sustainable business. Because again, for too long, it's just been the greener version that we have today. And that's not a response, not an adequate response. And we need, you know, a lot of the time I get asked, why do I still work with business? Why do I still work with industry if they're contributing? And I'm not anti-business, but I'm anti-business as usual. And unless we can start pivoting that talent, that amazing skill, the lowers in the world, to use their, you know, their traditional skill set and use it to inspire, to innovate, to get us to that next shift, then we're going to be complicit. We're going to continue to be part of the problem. So it's about committing to that future, accepting that we've been part of this challenge now, and putting everything towards that climate safe future. Because again, there's no industry on a planet that's not thriving. There is no jobs, no profit on a planet that's not thriving. So what are we doing if we're not tackling the climate crisis with absolutely everything, every industry, every career, every job that we do?
Fantastic, Ali, thank you for that. And I think this absolute transformation idea as well is really scary for a lot of businesses and a lot of business owners. And it's kind of like, you know, when you've got an elephant in front of you and you have to try and eat it, and how do you eat an elephant whole? And it's that kind of, you know, you're so paralyzed with the immensity of the problem, so the immensity and the scale of the issues that are happen, that you just don't see a way around. And so, you know, one of the questions in the chat is from one of our attendees is around degrowth. And, you know, the idea of degrowth is quite big right now. And so it really lends itself to a question about systems thinking and systems change. And it seems very hard for us as individuals to be able to change systems. But how would you see, or how would you advise people to go about systems change and actually be able to do things that are better for people and better for the planet? So I'll hand over to Ali first for this one.
Yeah, you know, again, when it comes to us facing the existential crisis, and then, like you say, rationalizing, because we all go back to the day job, we all have a number that we're tasked with hitting, whether it's sales, whether it's market value, whether it's growth. So those metrics we have got to challenge and start changing. And we know there's a conversation starting around GDP finally, that we need to move away. If nothing else, COVID showed us just how poor and weak and non-descriptive, you know, it is effective as a metric when we really show, we really missed out on those parts of society that were suffering, that weren't showing, even though GDP was doing quite well. So what does those new metrics look like? We see the models like donut economics. We see things like the well-being economy finally being talked about in Ireland. And how do we bring that then down to an industry and a company level? Because we have a real risk here now that this is going to be all about emissions. And that's where the focus is. And that whole carbon tunnel vision that we're seeing. And absolutely, there's an urgency to just stop emitting today and get emissions down as quick as we can if we're going to avoid climate breakdown. But we, like I say, we have a biodiversity crisis, we have a social inequality crisis, we have a consumption crisis as well. So we need to every now and then look up and look around and seek those wider voices that are missing from our conversations. And again, it's something I've had to relearn and learn bad practices in my own practice as well. I spent a lot of time when I stepped away from industry for a little while, going and talking to climate activists, going and talking to different parts of society. And it just really helped widen, challenge, inform my vision of what comes next for business and the role that it should play. And that's something that we actively need to do within businesses. Who is in the TMT, the top management team? What voices are there? Who's speaking up for science and biodiversity and seeing the unintended consequences and making sure that plans are in line with that thriving future that we want? And then it's around, you know, seemingly basics, but always complex things around the regulations, the policies, the mandates, like I say, the metrics. Is every signal going to industry telling them that this is the future? There should be no ambiguity about investing in climate action measures. There should be no hesitancy, and there certainly shouldn't be punishment for doing the right thing, which we're still seeing financially. It's still, you know, you're going to be penalized for doing the right thing on climate because it's not a level playing field yet. We're still not rewarding pro-action on this. So again, it's that bigger vision of systems change, and then bringing it down to make sure that every signal, every interaction we have as industry tells us absolute clarity that we are going for climate and we're going for climate action, and that we're all pulling in that same direction.
Fantastic, Ali. I really love that. And the way kind of I viewed that before is kind of like holographic systems, that we have to mirror what's going on at the individual level at every level within that system. And the signals and the incentives have to be directed towards that. And I know there's been quite a few different initiatives. I know there's the Net Zero Nations initiatives with Suriname and Panama and one other country, who are now saying, look, we're at net zero as a state, invest in us, bring your investment to the country. And that's a really different way of thinking, even at a national level. And that's starting to, spur on different ideas and different creativity around incentives and investments, even at a state level. So I think things like that are really, really important. I think you're so right, Ali, about where we focus. And it's this idea that the problems are so huge. So what we tend to do, and it's human nature, is try and find somewhere we have control, try and find somewhere that we can actually make a difference. And that's usually around the things that are easier. Being able to communicate, being able to assess, and then getting involved where things are easy to measure, easier to measure. And that's why I think a lot of companies have very much looked at the environmental side of sustainability rather than the human side and the people side of sustainability, because people are different and difficult and different and messy, and they're not easy to manage, they're not easy to measure. Whereas carbon, it's there, we can measure it. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's much easier. So it's trying to shift that focus and trying to shift, what we need to be thinking about. And it has to be signals from the government, from institutions, to be able to do that. So I'm going to throw this open to Laura now. I'd love to get your take on this idea of system change. How do we go about, within this paralysis, changing these systems?
Yeah, I think I'd love to approach this just from like maybe a smaller level and talking about like actually trying to affect change like within your business or within your industry, because I think Ali's spoken so well to, globally and from that macro perspective, like what's happening. But I love that image of, the starling murmuration, and everybody knows how that works, where, one bird might start to fly and affects the 7 around it, and then they affect the 7 around them. And it is really important to think about the role that everybody plays, as say, Donna, like even where you put an invitation out there to talk about sustainability in your business and see who shows up, because when you do follow those murmurations and those energies, you'd be surprised how that one step can lead to another step. And even just starting close in, because I know that something like this topic can be so huge and really daunting for people in business. They might be on a marketing team, they might not be on the sustainability team, they might not be touching this, but it's so important to actually start thinking about, well, within my system, within my area of control, within the 5 people that I work with, or the 10 or the 20 people that I work with, what could be interesting to explore here, or where is our area of responsibility to start looking at? And I think that a barrier there is really like imagination and control. Like you need to be able to reclaim your own energy within this story, no matter what your role is, and to understand that you do play a role in these systems, no matter what. Like, this is really, it can be just this block that we have in terms of the influence that we can actually have on these systems, because oftentimes you hear conversations like this and it's all about policy and it's all about this and that and carrots and sticks and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, we're human and we're all part of this business as usual at the moment, or trying to shift it. And I think that that's actually a really exciting thing to realize, to understand that these systems aren't made up of these unnamed people. We are part of these things, and we operate within them. So how do we break them open? And I think one of the greatest examples, and it came up in conversation the other day I was having about, just talking about young people, and as you said, young activists, their expectations for business and the gap that exists there between their expectations and what they're seeing, and that being such a big risk, but also a challenge to business. And a lot of people in business saying, well, they might be disappointed in terms of what they see or how fast they see the responses coming through. And I just thought about, this huge experiment that we've just lived over the past 2 years and COVID and the pandemic, and how that has broken open imaginations and possibilities like we've never seen before at enormous speed. And people say, obviously, that was a very real emergency and is a very real emergency, but so is the climate crisis. And it suffered from being treated as more of a long-term crisis and being treated as something that's happening in the future, where it is happening now. And I think that imagination and that perspective shift that has happened from a health perspective needs to happen more broadly, I think, for this, in terms of businesses having to pivot in order to operate in an operational system.
Fantastic, Laura. I love that. I love bringing it back to, the smaller scale. I think lots of people feel like they're powerless, and actually empowering people and, getting people to think and even reflect on what's important to you, what would really, be your passion, what would get you out of bed in the morning, and really think about how we change the world for people, or how we, help biodiversity. Is it water? Is it soil? Is it insects? Is it animals? Is it to do with working conditions, human rights? What really ignites your passion? And then finding a community, or even building a community yourself, to be able to make sure that those issues are front of mind. And something Ali said about representation as well, I think is hugely important. And, my experience with lots of international multi-stakeholder initiatives are they're full of people from business. They're full of people who can afford to go to Geneva to buy a bottle of water that costs, 10 euros and a hotel room that's 300 euros a night. But most people in the NGO sector, even in the academic sector, let alone workers or worker representatives, are never going to be represented there. So, it's a real bugbear of mine that we need to make sure people are empowered. We need the systems to bring people on, that they're represented within these big decision-making forums. They're resourced to be there, and their voices are really heard. And I think that then brings that power back to the individual, where the possibilities are endless. There was a lovely quote I heard from the Bishop of Canterbury, and he said, people are of infinite value. And I just absolutely love that every single person is of infinite value, and actually including people and including voices that are marginalized or not heard is absolutely key to really providing the possibilities that we need for these big transformations and shifts. I love the murmuration as well. It's much better than my holographic system. So I'm going to use that from now on, Laura. I hope you don't mind me stealing it. We've got a question here from Francis McNulty, and it kind of comes into something that we've talked about before, and it's about messaging. So Francis is asking about the mixed messaging that's coming from government policy to business around growing production and exports, as Ali was saying, are focused on GDP. I mean, come on, we all know it's not working. Can we stop doing it? And then requiring emissions reductions. GDP doesn't work with emissions reductions. It doesn't work with protecting our biodiversity, our environment, our forests, our water, our soil. So we need to be thinking very differently. But these mixed messages are really, really tricky to deal with, especially for business who are being pulled one way and the other. I think kind of, a parallel question to that as well is the mixed messages coming from business and the whole idea of greenwashing. We've been absolutely swamped with absolute rubbish in communications from businesses. I mean, it's kind of, we'll do one thing and all of our sustainability report is going to be around that. It's kind of like, the fossil fuel industry, most of those companies talking about how fantastic their investment in renewables are, when they are absolutely tiny and insignificant. And it's that kind of communication and that kind of reporting that really breaks down trust, across a society when we need that more than ever. So I'd like to throw those questions out. The one from Francis about what can businesses do in terms of this mixed messaging around, you have to have exponential growth, while, you can't have exponential growth because you're going to kill the planet. And also, the mirror of that, how do we ensure that companies can get their messaging across the right ways without breaking the trust of society, of consumers and other stakeholders? So I'm going to throw that open to Laura to take this one first.
Thanks, Donna. Yeah, such interesting questions. I feel like we could be here for hours. No, I think the first one on mixed messages from government and that idea of growth is actually sitting back and saying, like, well, first of all, like, what are we trying to grow? I definitely agree that GDP, I don't think it was actually created to be a measure of a successful country in the first place, and it just somehow has evolved into this thing that everybody's really stuck with. So yeah, I wouldn't be a fan of basing all of our success as a people's on that, definitely. But in terms of growing your business, there are lots of more sustainable ways to do that, where you're not necessarily going to be having a heavy impact on the planet and achieving growth, because we all, as Ali said, we're not anti-business at all. That this is about creating a sustainable way of living in harmony with the planet. And there was a really interesting case study done by Purpose Disruptors around effectiveness in communications. And actually, the advertised emissions report, which was published at COP26, talked about the actual role that our communications can have in sustainably growing a business. Because actually what came out was I think it was 2019, advertising was found to have increased every individual's carbon footprint by 28%. So that is what people consuming more because they have seen ads and everything like that. So a really interesting case study was done on Audi, their eco-effect, they were awarded with the most effective campaign in 2019 by the Effie Awards. And actually a group of people got together and looked at how the campaign could have had a lesser impact or a more positive impact on the environment were it done differently. So were they advertising an electric vehicle rather than a motor vehicle? Were they talking about actually more sustainable ways of driving, and just transferring the business focus on a different product even in the first place? So I think there are lots of interesting ways that you can still maintain a healthy business and customers by being more sustainable. And actually, a lot of companies are growing by creating more sustainable products. And actually even looking at, what services do we provide that have a lighter impact on the planet as well, and how you look to engage people in those lighter activities that you do as a business, and problem solving that way. But also, just to touch on the second part of the question there, on greenwashing, it's huge, and Ali and I have discussed this only recently, how we're seeing more and more of it. And part of me wants to think that some of the problem is literacy, but there definitely has been a shift from what I think, climate delayism, people denying that climate change is existing, to people actually delaying the need for immediate and radical action. And a lot of what's coming out that's problematic is people not focusing on holistic solutions, or, as you said, Donna, like pushing non-transformative solutions. So pushing, for example, fast fashion. I think it always gets called out. Pushing one say line of clothing that you have that is sustainable, even though I wouldn't say any new clothing would be sustainable, and then forgetting about the rest of what you're doing. So I think there's such a light being shone on greenwash at the moment, and a lot of younger people that we speak to as part of the Youth Lab and Think House are so knowledgeable, and they go and they do the work that I think it's up to everybody within business to do the work themselves as well, to ensure that what you are doing is definitely the right thing, like speaking on the literacy side of things, and that it's something that is sustained. It's not something that's a once-off, but it is fascinating and actually really exciting to see these debates become so mainstream now that it isn't just the early adopters anymore who say, I want to find my hemp dress. It's people actually saying, you know, how do we actually hold people to account and go beyond the product, as we've spoken about as well, and talk about the people behind products, and the workers and all of that. And we saw that in the whole Molly May influencer conversation this last week as well, where, you know, there's just this understanding of the intersectionality of everything that we do. And that can be daunting and complicated to approach from a communications perspective, but it's about working with people, I think, especially outside of your own business, to have sense checks on these things and what you're doing. You know, from that business activism and marketing perspective, we all saw what happened when Pepsi tried to become an activist and came out with an ad that didn't mean anything to anybody. And I don't think I'd be alone in using that as an example. So it is about turning to people who are experts and bringing them into your conversations, and saying, is this greenwashing? What do I need to do? How do I be better? And not being in your own echo chamber, because I think that can alleviate a lot of the fear as well, just joining somebody else in that journey. So hopefully I've answered some of those questions there.
That's great, Laura. I'm going to hand over to Ali to take that double-sided question as well about communications.
Yeah, and just to go back to the first point on, you know, business and growth, and it comes back to that point around the signals, but that works both ways. I mean, you know, business needs to stop being passive here and outsourcing all this responsibility to policy, because what we're seeing a lot of is business putting on this front of being pro-climate and lobbying behind the scenes against the measures that would get us there, i.e. things like carbon tax. You know, and we have to ask the question, why are we investing in any industry or company that hasn't figured out how it exists in a 1.5 degree world? You know, we don't seem to shine a light on that, because what happens to the people within those industries? What happens to the communities and the organizations and the wider societal impacts? Because this isn't a thing for 30 years time. We know, look around us, look at Australia today, 50 degrees. People can't go to work at that heat. We saw a report come out this morning that the number of days of increase and rainfall, severe rainfall, are going to increase. And again, how are you going to get your people to work? How are you going to get your raw materials in, raw materials out? So this is very much in business interest to lobby for ambitious and rapid climate action. And I really do think we have to see much more of that. And it always irks me that anytime we have a big conference in Ireland about sustainability, we have to fly in the leaders, the big thinkers, where's our Irish CEOs speaking up on this? And I find them hard to find. And I really want to see that shift now, stop being that passive recipient of, you know, underwhelming policy and underwhelming ambition, and start backing government to do more here, and putting your neck above, and hopefully bringing others with you. And then, on the greenwashing, there has never been more of it than there's been today. And that's a mix between bad faith, like Laura was saying, delay, trying new tactics. Like, again, look at those net zero plans. You know, 10 years ago, we would have loved that language, that talk of ambition, but open it up. And again, the detail's not there. You're talking about taking action post 2030. We're talking this huge dependency on technology that we have no confidence in as yet. We're again pushing it down the line and just shining a light on the tiny little good bit that we're doing. So we need lots more regulation. Again, we have to stop depending on companies to do the right thing here. Across the UK, we saw the launch of the Green Claims Code. It's the most detail I've ever seen around advertising. Again, it will all come down to how well that's implemented. Will the fines come through? We've seen the likes of Ryanair and H&M face the courts on misleading claims on this as well. But, you know, we're going to need the work to be done for this to be talked about. And I think that's the big challenge for businesses. They're realizing how big a caseload of work that's ahead before they confidently talk about, but that's the reality of it. And I think that, you know, again, we talk about greenwashing, we talk about businesses' role in this. Some of it's going to come down to red lines. Who are we going to work with and who are we not going to work with on this? Coming back to fossil fuel companies, delay tactics. Now, how much time are we willing to give industries that know the science, that have had the facts, that can see what's happening? How much time are we going to give them to come to the table on this? They're actively costing us our kids' futures. So how much wiggle room are we going to do? And we see a very live case in Edelman just last week, deciding to stick essentially with their fossil fuel clients for the moment. But they've threatened they might walk away. But again, what's the criteria for sticking with a client? And that's what I'd be really interested in, and challenge companies and people who work with companies to set themselves, hold up a mirror to the work you're doing. Because again, with those big macro challenges, my research is on a very micro element of it, the practitioner, the sustainability practitioner within organizations. And on the face of it, you might think they're working in sustainability. They must be contributing to the positive side. But we have to shine a light and hold up a mirror to all our roles in this, and where we're actually contributing to change, and where potentially, and it's uncomfortable to think about, we might be complicit in delaying action or watering it down by helping dial up that one little good thing that's doing, or helping not shine a light on the bad stuff. So it does come back to being brave. It comes back to advocacy. For me, I'm much more interested. Yes, we have to get emissions down. Yes, we have to get the disclosures out. But to do that, I want to see lots more companies speaking up loudly. We see employees rising. We see the growth of profession-led, like purpose disruptors. We have Irish Doctors for the Environment in Ireland. We have the Climate Bar for the Legal Association. We have Architects Declare. You'll find a community if you're looking for it. And that's what I get really excited about, the next succession of leaders. We don't have enough time, unfortunately, or privilege to let them get. We've got to help them move things faster. But, that challenging of power and who holds it is going to be vital to this. It's not just going to be about science and emissions. And I think we all now have an obligation to use whatever power, whatever privilege, whatever impact we have to push for more, because there is everything to fight for here.
Thanks, Ellie. No, that's absolutely brilliant. And I think it also comes back to the power of workers as well. And we've seen great strides in companies like Google and Facebook and Amazon, where the workers weren't happy with a lot of the policies that were happening and walked out. They were striking even if they weren't allowed to strike. And I think that's absolutely pivotal. I think one of the things that we found that is quite scary is that this whole industry around, and one of our questions was actually around greenwashing, and saying, should we just call it what it is, which is misinformation, disinformation? It's actually deception. There's an active deception going on by companies. We've just done some research, and we found 10 different strategies of deception within annual reports, integrated reports, and sustainability reports from companies like, Shell and Total and Japan Tobacco. And so we were looking at the tobacco industry, the oil industry, the coal industry, and they were employing so many different tactics to pull the wool over consumers' eyes and stakeholders' eyes about what's actually going on. And we have to think about, what are the punishments for this? We need to put the disincentives in place so that those red lines, as Ali was talking about, we know when they're crossed, we know what's happening. We've got so many more questions, and I know we're running out of time, and I'm being asked to wrap up on this. So I'd just like to ask Laura and Ali very, very quickly, just a couple of sentences. What do you think people should be doing now? What are the most important, maybe 3 things that they should be doing, for ensuring sustainability, and that we can grow our world and we can regenerate, but in a much more sustainable and non-environmentally impactful way? So Laura, I'll hand over to you for that first question.
Well, first of all, it's so last minute now. Like, we're in the final few seconds of extra time to actually get this job done. So you have to start with reduce your impact, follow the science, get that job done. Second of all, find your people, build your crew. Don't do this alone. And third of all, never forget what this is all for. Find that joy. This is about being alive on the planet, and for that to be able to sustain. So be fully present to what's happening, and nourish yourself to be able to keep going. They're mine.
Brilliant. Thanks, Laura. And Ali?
Yeah, I just say that, I know that this topic is really hard and there's so many injustices with climate change, obviously the biggest one being those least responsible are the most impacted. But another big one is us in the room, right? The adults of today. We have inherited this legacy of inaction and we have to do such a huge amount of work that we probably won't be around to see the benefits of if we do it right. And that's really tough. And it does feel like a weight on the shoulders, but it is such a privilege. It is such a privilege to have the information and to have the ability to do something about it. And I really think we need to remember it and keep it in mind as that, not feel so burdened, but feel that amazing opportunity we have to change the course of history. So like Laura, I would say, find your people, don't do this alone. There is so many groups and communities out there, you won't be left looking. Make sure you're surrounded because it is a marathon. Even though we need to sprint, we do need those supports in place to bring us back up. Use your voice, it doesn't have to always be about your footprint. Think about your handprint, talk to your TD, send those emails to companies, send a letter to the paper, get it on the conversation, get it on the table as a topic. And then my final ask would be, don't come to a lunchtime webinar and then forget about climate action. Take some time, be mindful to reflect on what we've talked about today and make a commitment to do something, do anything, because we should take it. It's so scary, but we should have a license to think radically and be much more braver in what we do because we're up against it. And we need that kind of radical crisis mindset now moving forward. So I really hope everyone listening in joins us on the fight.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ali. I just wanted to kind of try and encapsulate a few of the ideas that have come out, because I think Ali's right. We really need to keep this conversation going. And I'm sure Laura and Ali and myself, would be happy to give out our contact details if anyone wants to get in touch. There were so many questions that we didn't get to, and I'm so sorry if we didn't get to those questions. But I think, the key things that are really coming out of this from Ali and Laura, that we need to imagine a better world, and we need to join or build those communities to make that better world. We need to partner with universities, with experts, with grassroots, with international NGOs and charities that really have that deeper knowledge. I mean, that's one thing that I always come across when I'm talking to companies, is that, get in touch with us. We can help you. We can get you involved. And that's the same with NGOs and charities all over the world. Do it at a local level, do it at a national level, do it at an international level. Think like a supply chain academic, multi-level and holistic. And then this idea of being conscious, and I think that really came across from Laura and Ali. We need to be conscious of the language that we're using. We need to be conscious that overconsumption is the root cause of killing our planet, and overproduction. And we really need to be thinking about conscious work, having personal responsibility and taking personally responsible decisions and actions, and really holding yourself and your senior managers and your politicians accountable for what's happening. I mean, the biggest thing we can do is either vote to change the system or run for office yourself and really think about, what can I do that I'm passionate about and that I have knowledge of, and where I want to see radical change. And I'd quite like to see both Ali and Laura run for office. I'm not volunteering myself. So on that note, thank you to everyone. I just want to say a big thank you to Michelle Power and Michael Maloli, who have organized myself, Ali and Laura over the past few weeks. I'd like to say a huge thank you for everyone joining us today. Thank you so much for staying with us, for talking about this, for asking questions, for joining in, and really showing how important, this conversation is, and keeping this conversation going. And I'd also like to thank Taz for hosting, but my biggest thanks have to go to our fantastic guest today. So inspirational. So thank you so much to Ali Sheridan and Laura Costello, and hopefully we'll keep in touch and we'll hear a lot more as well from both of you soon. So I'll hand over to Taz.
Thanks very much indeed, Donna. Thanks to all of you for such a really enlightening conversation. So it was really interesting. Donna started off so well with the sort of alarming facts and statistics about the huge challenges that we face in trying to move forward towards a more sustainable and equitable future. And those are kind of facts that we're all fundamentally aware of on some level, but which many of us just kind of put to one side most of the time. So it's been really great to hear from you all. We're so committed to making a real difference and very much doing so. I think, you know, from just picking up on some of the themes there as well, I had some observations as well. So one of the kind of recurrent theme in these conversations across all of them actually so far is that we're much stronger together. We can make a bigger difference by engaging with larger groups of people and working towards systemic change, much more than we can achieve by just making some small personal adjustments as individuals. And Laura gave us the great image of the starling murmuration and the power of small individual changes of direction if they spread to the whole flock. I thought another theme that's particularly resonant for me is that our approaches have to be interdisciplinary and inclusive, you know, with a diversity of people and approaches across all branches and levels of business and society, interlinked as much as possible and working towards common goals as much as possible. And of course, that's a big challenge. And I think there's a lot of conversation around communication and education and the difficulties of getting the messages across very clearly so that they can be digested by everybody involved. I thought there was also a really fascinating conversation around the metrics and that the challenge to try and change the metrics. You know, the measures of success can't continue as they have done business as usual, just in terms of growth and sales and profits and GDP at a national level. There have to be new ways of thinking about success, for example, in terms of moving towards zero carbon. And, you know, I think the point was made that it's a question we're trying to break down the huge elephant-sized challenges into bite-sized digestible pieces that can be achieved and measured, but also to be doing a range of those things, not just one. So I also like the comment in the chat, actually flowing from that it's not all about numbers. You know, narratives, especially critical narratives, can also be powerful and compelling and are actually needed just as much to help make sense of it all, what the numbers are telling us and what they're not telling us. So, and as such, the conversation, of course, also explored greenwashing, the great concern that more is often being made of comparatively small and isolated actions than they merit, and the need to call this out actively and draw some red lines. So in the end, I just want to reiterate the call to action that was made by everybody to make everyone's New Year's resolution to take the first step towards a truly different approach and to keep on walking down that path as the year unfolds and on into the future. So thanks very much again for all of your time and insights, and thanks to everyone for tuning in to listen today. A recording of this event is going to be available in the coming days on the UCD Alumni YouTube channel, along with our other episodes in the UCD in Conversation series that are already up there. And just before we wrap up, I just wanted to let you know that I'll be back in a couple of weeks with our final episode focusing on the UN SDGs. We'll be joined by Professor Dolores O'Riordan, Director of the UCD Institute of Food and Health and UCD Vice Principal for Global Engagement, but also Dr. Afric O'Sullivan, who's Assistant Professor and Principal Investigator in the UCD Institute of Food and Health, and Professor Jim Kinsler of the UCD School of Agriculture and Food Science, to hear about progress being made on Sustainable Development Goal 2, which is zero hunger, both in Ireland and further afield. So another really interesting and important discussion there. So, and the registration link for that webinar should be appearing in the chat box around now, and I do hope that you'll join us again then on the 27th of January. So for now though, thanks very much indeed again to everybody, and good afternoon.